It's part 6 of our 13 questions that will define the Phoenix Suns season preview series. And today we are answering who is the Suns' fifth starter going to be? Who is their fifth closer actually going to be? And why? We'll break it down on today's episode. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start your week. Today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets back when you visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and get started. Hit follow or subscribe if you're finding us for the first time. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, so I appreciate you guys joining me every single day now that we are in full swing with this season preview series. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Suns. All you got to do is hit that button, and you'll get Suns content in your feed every single day. Brendon Dueñas is joining us as he does every single Monday here on the podcast. This is already the second season preview show that Brandon has done with me. We're rifling through them. There was a disappeared answer and question as part of the preview series on Friday. We had some technical difficulties, an episode that is lost to, I guess, the computer gods, just the internet, the World Wide Web. It has been eaten up. So then I'm sorry there was no Friday episode. We'll talk Matt Ishbia another time, but today we're talking fifth starter. We're talking about who's going to start, who's going to close for this team, and why. And Brandon, I'll put it to you this way. Let's just put the players that are actually on this roster aside. Maybe after the Beal trade, if I had asked you, what do you want in a fifth starter for this Phoenix Suns team? What would you have said?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just someone that does the little things, hustle, and doesn't need the ball to make an impact. Those are really the main things I look at. Obviously, there's a lot more specific needs, but those are just the first things that jump to my mind.
Yeah. I think I'm sure I did say something. I think you and I talked shortly after the trade. I'm sure we had opinions then, but I definitely would have said shooting, and I think that speaks to your point about not needing the ball. And yeah, I mean, I guess we still don't really know what every element of the scheme of this team is going to look like, but we did know Frank Vogel was the coach. So I probably would have said length, because I think we know the principles of his defensive style is to really try to swarm and create turnovers and do that type of thing. So I think you and I are pretty closely in alignment. Maybe somebody a little like Mikal Bridges would have been nice in a vacuum, right? Like in a factory, if you could dream it up. But obviously, with the salary situation the way that it was going to have to be minimum players. Has your thinking on it changed the more that maybe we've heard from Vogel, or thinking about how these pieces might fit together or anything like that? Or do you still feel like that bare kind of like an energy guy is basically what you're describing? Is that changed at all? We can get into players now. Has anybody risen or fallen in your mental standings of who should get this slot, since we kind of knew what the roster was going to be 2 months ago?
So I would say just a specific skill set is I'm not going to say shooting is not as important, because it is still very important, but I think I might have overthought how important that is. Obviously you need someone that can hit wide open shots, but I think they can, especially when you're replacing Chris Paul with Bradley Beal, the spacing is going to, just from that alone, the spacing is going to look a lot better. So I think they're just adding in a player that can cut, get to the rim, has that length, like you said. I think if they can provide those things, then, I feel like the Suns offense is good enough to survive. And what's a trade-off defensively? If you're just going to get a sniper like a Utah or a Gordon or whoever, like, that's when you kind of look at like Okogie and Bates-Diop and just kind of measure those trade-offs. So for me, like, I'm not saying shooting isn't as important, but it's like kind of taken a little bit of that off of my initial analysis. But I do think finding that right balance is going to be huge depending on which lineups they throw out there.
No, I think that is a great point. And that's, we always get sucked back into like critiquing the way that the team used to be set up. But I promise we're looking forward in this episode. But because you brought up Chris Paul, like, I quickly on that idea, that was one of the criticisms, or not even criticisms, but downsides that I always talked about when they got into these playoff duels with these teams. The nature of having Chris Paul on your team, especially the version that the Suns got, is he creates for others just as much, if not more, than he creates for himself. And if those others aren't great, then you're setting yourself up for failure a little bit. Whereas by bringing Durant in and bringing Beal in, now those guys by nature create for themselves, and they don't even need a ton of spacing to do that, right? And like, you always want the spacing, but the number and the types of players that can succeed next to superstar scorers it's just a bigger list than the guys who can survive when everything has to kind of be pristine and really work to perfection in the half court, the way that Monty and Chris kind of wanted things to operate. So that's super smart way to put it. I think, we've seen with KD guys like Bruce Brown or Nick Claxton or others really take a leap despite not being able to shoot, because they could do some of that other stuff. So I think that's a good way to put it. We're going to also talk about we're going to talk starting and closing. Does it change your opinion about what you might want to see at the end of the game? Because I think a lot of people feel like that answer might be different for the Suns, who starts versus who closes.
I think, and this is just such a cop-out answer, and Vogel even pointed to this already, it just depends on the matchup, depends on how the game's going, what the personnel is for each team in those situations. Like, I guarantee if there's betting lines on who the fifth starter and fifth closers are going to be, like, even Vogel probably doesn't know at this point, like, legitimately, because it's going to be a competition, which you could look at it two ways. You could look at the negative side of it, or the positive that these guys are going to be hungry. A lot of these guys are on I honestly just think they're just 1 year deals. Like, yes, they're 2 year deals, but a lot of them they came to Phoenix to build their value and get that Bruce Brown type bag. So I think having that competition is going to help a lot. And I would be disappointed if at least one or two of those like pseudo 2 year deals didn't turn into like a bigger contract for those guys somewhere else, because then you could take that and use it to recruit future free agents, say like, come here for a year, and then go get your bag afterwards and have a chance to win the ring.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even, undrafted guys, which we didn't really see the Suns do this year, but that's another pathway. If you can sell them on, hey, come here and you'll develop, have a chance to contribute. Maybe you're an older rookie and this will be a good opportunity for you. I think that's something we haven't really, talked a ton about, but that could easily be a pathway for the Suns. But let's talk about Keita Bates-Diop in a few minutes. I think we can not spend as much time on him because he's the guy I think most people expect to be the fifth starter for this team, if not maybe their closer. That's kind of where I want to start. Is we know, 39% from deep last year, 31% the previous year, 34% over the course of his career, but just not a ton of attempts, not a lot of minutes he's played in his NBA life so far. And especially from corner threes was even better, 38% compared to a much lower percentage on the non-corner threes. So that's all good. He has the length and size that you want. He can probably defend a multitude of types of players. I actually think, Brendon, that he might be the closer for this team more than a lot of people have argued. I think the status quo or the expectation is KBD will start, Eric Gordon will close. I kind of feel like Bates-Diop might start and close. What do you think about that?
It's certainly a possibility. And I think, especially when you look at just the trajectory of his career, like last year really was kind of a breakout season for him in terms of just looking more confident and comfortable offensively. Like he's not a scorer by any means, but he's someone he's got pretty solid size. He plays almost like a big in a way with some of the stuff he does with his rolls to the rim. They can use him in some interesting like pick and roll actions and post up. So offensively, like even if the shot's not falling at 40%, like I don't think that's a fair sample for him just because it was on a low amount of attempts and there wasn't as much pressure as there will be on him now, I think, to hit those shots. But I think offensively, like he can still contribute in other ways that, someone like maybe Okogie, like if a shot's not falling, sometimes he could be just a net negative. Like I think Bates-Diop, that's what gives him the edge over Okogie for me is I think offensively he could still contribute in other ways. And then defensively, when it comes to closing, like just adding that size, ability to grab some rebounds, like that's the difference between him and Gordon that could give him an edge in some of those games. But if it's a game where maybe they're playing the Warriors and it's just a back and forth, just high scoring game that they need buckets, like that's where Gordon could wind up closing some games. So that's just kind of going back to what I said about the whole, just depends on who they're playing and what the game flow is really like.
Yeah, if you go back to college for him, he shot 35% on about 350 attempts. And then in the NBA so far, 34% on about 370 attempts. So, yeah, I don't think it's probably reasonable to say that he's going to be a 40% shooter again. I also think, the pressure part is a good way to put it. You know, a lot of those Spurs games didn't matter. It probably is a little more comfortable to take and make those shots when it's just whatever. It feels like an open gym almost. I do think that matters, even though the shots will be more open. But I would expect him to fall somewhere between that career lifelong average between college and the NBA and where he was last year. Like I think he'll be at least average or above average. And I just think he'll be able to blend into the identity of this team in a way that will feel more sound. But I agree with your point that it will depend on the matchup. There will be nights where, holy crap, this team's on like 130-point pace and we got to keep up with them. And Vogel just throws out Gordon or even a shooter who we can talk about one example of that later on. I guess I would say maybe the highest number of closing lineup fifth guy reps will go to Bates-Diop over the course of the season would be one of my predictions this year. But do you still feel like it's probably going to be Gordon closing the most for this team? I know that's been your expectation throughout most of the summer.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be like a chunk of Gordon, Bates-Diop, and even some Okogie minutes, like I said, just depending on how things go. But I think just Gordon's veteran leadership too is going to be huge for certain games, especially early. Like Vogel is probably going to want to earn that trust from Bates-Diop before he sticks in him in too many like critical situations like that. Because that's just the type of coach he is in terms of he trusts his guys. But if you give him a reason to trust you and, he's having a good game, like I think Bates-Diop absolutely is the front runner to take that spot from Gordon. Like I think that's their 1A, 1B in whatever order you really want to put them.
Let's talk about Gordon next. Let's jump into Gordon, break his game down, break what he brings down to this team and why he does make a lot of sense for that role. First, let's talk about FanDuel and why it is the best time to get in on FanDuel, because it's the start of the NFL season. And right now, new customers who bet $5 get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is incredibly easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. I promise you that one of the best things about FanDuel that a lot of these smaller companies just do not have is the number of bets. You really can make it fun. It feels very similar to fantasy, which obviously FanDuel made its name on back in the day, but you can do player props, you can do parlays, you can do all these types of things that really feel just like a more fun way to consume sports. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, kick off the NFL season with them. That's FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, we're keeping it rolling. Let's talk Eric Gordon as we answer the question of who will be this team's fifth starter, who will be their fifth closer. Brandon, just make the case for why you're so high on Gordon being that guy to close out games for this team, slide in next to the big four, so to speak, that are holdovers from last year plus Beal. Just what intrigues you? What makes you think it's going to be him more often than not?
Yeah, so there's a lot to like with Gordon, even at his age. Like what we saw with him, what he did in the Bahamas. Like he can still get up and throw it down on you if you take your eye off him for a second. So, but yeah, 6'9" wingspan, deceptively strong. Like you get him on the block, like you're not going to move him too much unless maybe you're like Giannis or something. Like I think he's a little bit underrated in like just the one-on-one defense, like in terms of ISO defense, and just having guys like him, Booker, and Beal just kind of all in that same little like 6'5" range with like long wingspans that are strong and can kind of switch. Like I think Vogel can do some interesting stuff defensively with those guys, and I don't think either like any of them have to be necessarily a one-on-one ISO stopper with how they're going to like just pack the the perimeter with guys switching, just staying active. So I think defensively, like it's not as much of a red flag as I think some people might think at first glance. Like I think they could still be a pretty damn good defense with that starting lineup in Gordon. And then offensively, obviously, he hits deep threes. Like it's no secret by now. Like he's one of the deepest 3-point shooters in the league. So adding more spacing to your three superstars and DeAndre Ayton down low, like to me, that's just I've been on the record multiple times. Like I think that the offensive group has a chance to do something really special. So if you can survive defensively and you have an unstoppable offense to close out games, like that to me is like why I still give him an edge over Bates-Diop at this point. But yeah, I think there's different angles to like on each end with Gordon, whereas some of these other guys, they feel a little bit one-dimensional at this point. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand with EG.
Yeah, I think defensively he has at least a floor that's like he can probably survive and not make you too much worse. Like that might be the best way to put it. I mean, I want to believe that he can be even better than that, but he is 34 going on 35. And, last year in the playoffs, I think that's probably how I would have described his defensive impact. Like good enough. Right. And that's fine because he's your fifth best player on the floor. And, he is making a minimum contract and all these other things. So I think that's probably how I would put it. I do like his length and IQ within that to just execute what's being asked. Like that's another aspect. He's not a young guy, so you would think he could do that a little bit better. Offensively, yeah, deep range, good shooter, has always been a good shooter. The thing that intrigues me, and I don't even necessarily know what it means for him playing alongside the best players on this team, but it's just worth noting and maybe speaks to his role when those guys are off the court as well. Maybe it secretly like contributes to my Keita as the closer guy guess, because that way Gordon's actually on the floor with the bench lineups more. But 2 years ago, he was actually a really good driver. Like you look at the stats, the drive-in kicks, the finishing, he had and he got to the free throw line 4.2 times per game, which was the most since the Pelicans were still the Hornets, to put it into perspective. And he just really excelled even on a bad Rockets team. That was his age 32 season. So that was 2 full years ago. But that year makes me feel like when he's feeling good physically, and you mentioned the Bahamas stuff too, he has a little bit of juice. So athletically, physically to get to the basket and do something. Maybe that's just never coming back. Maybe that was one last swan song, but I still kind of feel like that's there. So that intrigues me, but I don't know if that makes it better or worse to play with the best players. Maybe that actually is part of a case to say like, oh, put him out there with like one of the stars or two of the stars and a bunch of role players and actually give him the ball a little more. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the main point when you look at this entire rotation is just like seeing how Vogel does like the staggers with, is he going to keep Booker in the entire first quarter like we've seen Monty do? How soon will Durant come out? Like I've talked about before, is like I think we could see a lot of Ayton Durant second unit lineups where Beal and Booker are on the bench, and you plug Gordon in there with those guys, and there's a little bit less pressure on him to do everything offensively, like with the second unit. Like I think the staggering is going to be huge, and obviously if one or two of the guys are out and then there's injuries and all that stuff, that kind of changes the entire dynamic for sure. But I think Gordon can kind of get a healthy balance of whenever you need a bucket off the bench, put him in for not for long, like extended stretches, just to kind of give Beal and Book a little bit of a breather. And then at the end of the game, like you can come back out there and throw him out there for those, those clutch minutes, and he'll have fresh legs, which at his age is important. So I think that's the main thing, is just using his minutes wisely and not overextending him. So you're getting, optimal Eric Gordon minutes and not just a tired old man at the end of the game, like we've seen with Chris Paul sometimes and some of these other guys that get up there. Like if they're doing too much throughout the course of the game, it takes a toll. It does. So that's why I think having all these guys kind of trading off the workload is going to help them a lot.
I think Gordon would be the most likely guy to step into the starting lineup if any injuries or rest happens for the Stars. So I'll say that. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any chance that he would start games?
No, not unless there's an injury. I feel like he's more, just historically speaking, it's always been like kind of his role to be that sixth man. He feels pretty comfortable in that and to close games when you need him to. But if Book and Beal are healthy, I don't see it, but I can't rule it out. Like you never know what Vogel's going to do. He's not afraid to throw things out there, like kind of the anti-Monty in terms of how he'll get stubborn at times. Like you could get in his doghouse pretty easily, and he's not afraid to make that change right then and there. But he'll also give you a chance to get yourself out of it. So that's kind of the difference that I've just from talking to Lakers fans or people that have followed Vogel, is like he's not afraid to make adjustments like in the moment as much. So I think that's why you can't really rule anything out, and why I said if he had a bet on who the fifth starter would be right now, like I don't even think, like he'd have probably a good guess, but it's just
But even like you said, even on opening night, it might be different than it will be by like Thanksgiving, right? Like he said that 100%. Too, that it's going to change. Yeah, I don't think Gordon will get many starts in the regular season unless there's especially Booker or Beal are out. But I would say in the playoffs, that would maybe be kind of like a chess move adjustment to just say, like, if we think this is our best offensive lineup and we expect him to close the game, all right, Nuggets, like we're just starting him, or something like that. Like I could see it, but let's rifle through some of these other options. We spent a lot of time on the two most obvious candidates, but there are at least three. I actually think we could get to 5 other possibilities. So we'll do that after one more quick break. All right, coming back, let's go to Josh Okogie, Brandon, who you kind of mentioned fitting the bill of what you're looking for. In terms of shooting, he does slide into the case for kind of what we were saying with Bates-Diop, where he comes to Phoenix, his shooting goes from below 30% to 34%, but in the playoffs, 14%, right? And that was a low number of attempts. Obviously, he did not play a ton. It was 14 attempts, but he only made 2. And he just didn't shoot a lot either. He got a little nervous. And the other part that actually Nate Duncan brought up, he had Michael Schwartz on for their Suns preview, and I listened to it, and you try not to take too much. But I think that the one point that I will steal is Okogie's also not an awesome finisher. And I think that is a valid criticism. That plus not being an awesome passer, you just start to run into like, okay, well, he has to do something on offense besides offensive rebound. So that would be the thing still holding me back. If he had shown a little bit at other offensive skills, I could imagine how he would slide into a group like that. But it's just hard for me to envision it.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think Bates-Diop is the favorite over him when you're just comparing those two, just because like I mentioned, like he can contribute in other ways offensively. Like he has that identity where he can finish, he can cut, he can do a quick like little post up. So if Okogie can get a little bit better in the short roll too, there's some stuff that they tried with him last year that I think could be interesting. But he has to make quick decisions and be confident. So with Okogie, like I definitely think he has, especially defensively, he fits exactly what they need in terms of bringing that tenacious energy, just being a menace on the ball, picking up full court, diving on the floor, and making ridiculous plays. That there was one last year. I think it was against Houston when he blocked Jalen Green and just took it coast to coast and dunked it. Like stuff like that you're just like, good Lord. Like, I mean, but he just needs to learn how to harness it, I think. So that's, like you said, 14% from 3 in the playoffs. It felt lower somehow. It wasn't like he was shooting that often, but it was pretty rough. So I think with him, it's just all about confidence. If he can be confident offensively, then that's when he's making his biggest dent.
He increased his assist rate, lowered his turnover rate, took more shots, increased his usage rate, all good trends, and the 3-point shooting went up, and he's only 24. So I don't think you can write him off yet. I think it was smart to bring him back. He offensive box plus minus, if you want to look at that, like he was only a slight negative on offense. If he can even get to like a 0 offensive box plus minus where he's just a neutral with the stuff we know he can do defensively, and to your point, how well Vogel has tapped into that skill set in the past, because he is small, but he can be really game breaking at the point of attack while also being strong enough to guard maybe not every forward, but most. He had another nice play against Paolo Banchero, who's 6 inches taller than him, right? So like we've seen it, but we'll see. All right, let's talk about Yuta Watanabe. This one feels similar to Eric Gordon, where it's like if his defense is passable, he's bigger, he rebounds solidly, and he just can bomb away from 3 and really break defenses apart with his shooting. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some games where either Yuta starts, or if he's really hot, he might just close games. Like I think that will happen this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to have those games where he's just a flamethrower, and it's like, I dare you to take me out. Like, take me out at your own risk. Like I'm feeling it. I've made, I'm 5 for 6.
Or tell KD you're taking me out. See what he says.
Exactly. So, and I think just with his intangibles too, like he's a really smart player off the ball. Like some of the stuff he's going to be able to do, like he'll just find himself in the right place at the right time. And sometimes that's luck, but a lot of times that's a skill that I think he does a great job of. The more I've dove in on his film, and just being in the right spot, and all the attention some of the stars will get sometimes, like it's just going to lead to open looks for him. And so I definitely think there's going to be some games he'll close. I don't think he'll be the closer by any means, but yeah, he'll definitely have his nights and his moments. And him and Eubanks, I think, are going to be fan favorites. Like it's going to happen quick. So just be ready for that.
Okay. I don't mean to be so, it's not even negative, but there's an interesting phenomenon. If I'm just being realistic, if Yuta gets the biggest role on this team that maybe he's ever gotten, he's at only the number is usually 750 is what they say. Like the stats people will say about a player's 3-point attempts, you have to get to 750 before it's like super trustworthy in terms of what your percentage is. So he's only at 328 in the NBA, 39% on those. So you go to the World Cup this year, 5 games, 26% from deep. The Asia Cup last year, 4 attempts per game, 29% from deep. The Olympics before that, 5 attempts per game, 33% from deep. You look at the G League, he shot 35% across 220 attempts in 3 seasons over there. And then in college, he shot 34% across 460 total attempts at George Washington. I don't want to poo-poo it, but that is kind of like the past couple of years have definitely been a substantial step forward for him, especially the COVID season and last year were kind of outliers if you really look at it. And in between those, he had a 34% season in Toronto on limited attempts. So I don't think it's a given that he's just like this flamethrower shooter. But obviously the most recent data would tell you he's going to be, especially on a good team like Brooklyn was, where he shot 44%. It's something to monitor, because I don't want people to think this guy's just going to shoot 48% from 3 without any question.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I haven't dug that deep, like heading back to those, but I do think
until right now. I just started to poke around while we were talking about him. So but it is interesting.
Yeah, no, what I'll do with that information is pretend not to see it and just choose to focus on his most recent track record and ignore the FIBA stuff, because I feel like those are small sample sizes. It's really tough to gauge on that. But then you look like further back and you talking about 200 plus attempts, and that's kind of where we're.
I mean, I definitely don't think 26% at this World Cup is indicative, because he's also like the best player on that team. So he's not exactly
it's a different role.
Yeah, whereas on this team, it's like in any lineup, he's going to be the least paid attention to guy, you would think, and he's never really going to have the ball. So he should feast. And obviously, I'm leaving out some context within that where he's been an awesome corner 3-point shooter basically forever. I'm trying to go down to that corner 3-point percentage. He's been at 41% on his career. In the NBA, they don't have those numbers for Real GM. to look at all the international and college stuff, but reason to believe. I'm just giving that caveat. Jordan Goodwin, any chance he starts or closes any games this year?
Maybe if there's an injury like Book or Beal, and they want to keep Gordon in that 6-man role, then I could see him. Like, I think there's a reason campaign other than the luxury stuff. Like, he got released, they feel good about Goodwin. So if he finds his way starting in a few games due to injury, like, it would not surprise me. If this team's at full strength and he's starting, that means one of two things: either the people that they thought could do it are not playing well, and that's a huge red flag, or Goodwin's just looking incredible and they can't keep him off the court. So we'll see. He definitely has a lot to prove, and I think there's lots of like in his game, but he's just going to have to go out there and earn those minutes, because there's so many guys that can do what he can do, essentially fighting for the same minutes.
Yeah, he would have to just be. I would think the thing that would have to happen there is he shows that in addition to being a good point of attack defender, he can also guard bigger players, and he's as good of a shooter as a lot of these other players we've already mentioned. If he can do both of those, then you're talking about a guy who's pretty similar to Eric Gordon, or pretty similar to Bates-Diop, or maybe even a little better than Josh Okogie, right? But right now, I think that's a lot of ifs. So I agree, but I do like your point about maybe he starts. He seems like a logical candidate again if both Booker and Beal were out in a game, which, like, let's please not have that happen too often. But maybe then it's him and Gordon get the start or something like that. But probably not going to happen. I wanted to make the case for Ish Wainwright, but I just can't. I do think he'll be more impactful defensively in this scheme than he was for Monty. I think that Vogel switching him a lot and maybe having him be even more aggressive as a helper could result in another really strong season. But I think it's kind of the same thing as Goodwin, where it's like, even if you can kind of squint and make the case, it's like the season's probably going in a weird direction if that's even on the table.
Yeah, and just to get weirder, like, I mean, Kamara or Bull.
Yes, that was the last one. Kamara was the one I was going to go to. Yeah,
he's kind of the wild card in all this, right? Like, he does a lot of the things that I think could make sense to be one of those guys that, and you'll see this with teams like that have that same kind of issue, I guess you could call it, the Suns have with not really having a true fifth starter, is just having a guy come in and start and really maybe play only like 5 minutes, like the rest of the game combined after he makes his first rotation. So, like, he could be one of those guys that they just bring him in for some energy, burn a few fouls, play physical, just run up and down the court, try to dunk on people. So he's kind of a little bit of a wild card. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say a rookie's going to start for a team trying to win a championship, but like if someone's going to do it that comes out of nowhere, like, he could be that guy.
Yeah, I think it's probably not a this year thing. I kind of just don't expect him to play much at all. I think with a player like that in a situation like what the Suns have, so many good options in the rotation, you just have to make a decision at the end of the year. Is he going to be a part of who could play, or is he not? And I think for his sake, developmentally too, that clarity goes a long way. Whereas if it's like he gets a shot randomly in October, you could just do a lot of damage to his confidence if things don't go well, right? And so it's kind of like, do you think he's ready or do not? And like, that's it. Like, leave it at that, I'm trying to look at guys who are in similar situations. I guess like Max Christie, he was a much higher pick in 2022 than he was the 35th pick, but similar situation. Lakers obviously trying to compete for a championship. He played 512 minutes this year and actually started 3 games. Did that really happen? That does not even seem possible. Do you think Kamara plays more or less than 512 minutes?
Oh, that's tough. I'm gonna go slightly over, just because I think there's going to be some garbage minutes, and I think there's, especially towards the end of the year, where the Suns they're going to be down a few guys and they're going to need a body. So I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be somewhere right around that 500-minute range. But I think he'll have a chance for sure. And I'm going to pay attention to preseason, just in terms of confidence. Like, if he could build some momentum there, like, that's going to be his real chance to get minutes out of the gate. But I don't think he'll be like a immediate contributor. It'll be more of like, if these guys aren't stepping up, like we're going to try this guy here.
Yeah, Christie really bulked up on the minutes in that stretch where we thought the Lakers season might be falling apart when Anthony Davis got hurt.
Yep.
He played a bunch, and then that was kind of it. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Kamara is the wild card. I hope we see enough this year that he can feel like when we do an episode like this a year from now, it's like, okay, maybe now you say yes, and really start to think about it. But, without a G League team and with limited opportunities, that development has to come somewhere. So I don't think it's a bad idea to say yes to that question of, is he going to be a guy who might play or not? I think you could say yes. And then you just got to really commit to it and put him in anytime that there's a garbage time moment, or if there's an injury, say you're playing tonight, just try it. Right. Trust especially the rest of your talent to win out and make him feel comfortable.
Yeah. Especially if a guy like Ish Wainwright's not really showing any progress, and you're at that point where you don't really have too many guys that have the size and fit that type of role that you want on this roster once you start to really look at it. So I think he'll definitely have a chance, and it's just going to come down to, well, is he going to prove himself and gain Vogel's trust, which it's pretty tough to do that as a rookie, especially on a team that's going for the title. But at the same time, I think he definitely has some qualities they're looking for and can make a splash. And hopefully it's not too soon, because like I said, if it happens right away, that means either he's looking incredible or something bad's happening. So we'll see.
All right, that'll wrap us up. That was question number 6 of 13 on our Phoenix Suns season preview series. Hit follow or subscribe. Get this show. Get the answers to questions 7 through 13, which I know you're waiting for with bated breath, on the feed every day from now through training camp. We'll obviously be touching on news as it happens as well. And camp will be right after the series is over. So that's the agenda. If you want that stuff, then you know what to do. And we will talk to you tomorrow.